Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to another video. This has been a long time. I don't even know, several months since my last video that I did. I just haven't been led to do any video teachings over the last couple of months. In fact, even this particular video teaching, I've been wrestling with the Lord about it for quite a while, as to whether I should do it, whether I should just leave it. This particular subject is something that I'm particularly passionate about in all my studies of the scriptures. It's probably the one area where I've spent probably the most amount of time. This subject has received a fair chunk of my study time over the last 6 years. And when I started off, I had no understanding of the biblical calendar. So it's been a long journey of scratching through the scriptures, looking at all the various ideas, and there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of different ideas of what the calendar should look like, what the biblical calendar looks like. And everybody's got their own belief, or their beliefs that their particular understanding is the correct understanding. It's a very controversial, very emotive subject, and it's one that people feel particularly passionate about and don't easily let go. So I've under no illusions. I suspect that many people will probably not accept what I'm about to say in this video, what I'm about to share with you. I believe it is the absolute truth. It is based on scripture, and I will be referring to scripture throughout to basically illustrate and prove my point that I'm trying to make. I think that there's opportunity for each and every one of us to review our current understanding in this calendar. And I believe that the Lord, just like he did in Moses' day at the Exodus, he restored the calendar. I believe that he is in the process, and he will restore his calendar, the true biblical calendar. He will restore it in this next Exodus that's about to begin, and the final Exodus. And whether he will restore it at the beginning or whether he will restore it at the end, that I can't say. But I'm fairly certain that by the millennial reign, by the beginning of the millennial reign, the true biblical calendar will be understood. So I believe that as watchmen, we are required to at least obtain our best understanding from the scriptures of what the calendar should look like, and that we shouldn't just wait to see or wait for the Lord just to reveal what the truth of the matter is. One of the reasons why I say that is because of the reward that comes with seeking out truth. We are required to look for truths. The Lord described this in the parable of the talents, the parable of the pounds, described in the book of Matthew and Luke, where he said to some 1 pound is given, some 2, some 5, and those that used what they were given, those that were given, as that used their talents or pounds to gain more pounds, were referred to as good and faithful servants. And that, of course, is speaking of truths. In other words, the Lord gives us, to some he gives 2 truths, to some he gives 5 truths, and we are required to use the truths that we're given to acquire more truths. And so this will be an opportunity to acquire yet another truth and to receive that reward, which I believe will be probably the greatest reward that a person can receive, and that is to hear our Master's voice saying, "Good and faithful servant." And so if this video blesses you and helps you achieve yet another truth, another arrow to add to your quiver, then that'll be fantastic. That'll be a great blessing for me also. So If you're not interested in this subject, by all means, move on. If you're interested in obtaining another truth, please listen to the end. I will also be talking a little about the time that many people are looking forward to, within the next 3 days or so. I believe that something very important will happen, but not quite what some are hoping or expecting to happen. We know that the next major event is the taking of the bride, and of course that is imminent, but I think we've got at least another 5 weeks or so, 4.5 weeks to go before that event. Although we might well see something really major important, and I will touch on that. It's not really part of the subject of this calendar, although it is related to it, and it's ultimately what leads us, probably the reason for wanting to get another reason for wanting to get a clear understanding of the biblical calendar and how it works, and when the year begins, etc., and what the biblical calendar structure should look like, is so that we can understand the Lord's appointed days, His appointed times, and to understand what He's going to do when. So, without any further ado, I'm going to refer to a document that I put together 3 years ago. I published it, and over the last 3 years, so it was 2023 that I published it on my Google Drive. I will share a link to my Google Drive. There's a number of my studies on that drive, and you're most welcome to have access to any of those studies. I'm not saying that I know it all. I'm not saying that everything is 100%, but I do believe I've been able to uncover a number of truths, a number of biblical truths, and I just want to share them with you, and likewise I like to hear what other people have discovered, what other people have learned. I've learned a tremendous amount from so many other biblical scholars, and I've been able to acquire truths as a result of hearing what they have to say and digging into and verifying the things that they've discovered. So if this video does nothing else but just encourage you to go and verify for yourself, and that it becomes a personal revelation in terms of the calendar for yourself, and then you make your own choices on the matter, then I've achieved my goal. So although this document has been available for the last 3 years, I think it's been poorly read. I think it's been largely ignored. Much of what I've had to say on the matter has not been accepted by most of my brothers and sisters in Christ. And but so I accept that. That's fine. I'm not saying that you need to hear me, but I need to at least be at that point where I can stand before the Lord and say, well, I delivered what you asked me to deliver. And whether you accept it or not, that's your choice. So I'm going to be, during this video, I'm going to be referring to this document that I prepared. It has been edited a few times, and I did a fairly large edit of the document about a month or two ago. And so I'm going to share it with you. The link will be in the description box for you to download, to go and check it out yourself. I'm not going to read through the study verbatim, word for word, and I'm going to skip out some of the detail. I want to focus on some of the main points and really just highlight the main points that will help you to understand what I believe to be the true biblical calendar. What I believe to be the only true biblical calendar. I've looked at virtually every calendar out there, and I've come to the conclusion that in every single one of them there's an aspect that does not meet the scriptural requirements. And although the calendar itself is a mystery within the scriptures, it's not defined in one place. It's bits and pieces all over, spread out throughout the Old Testament. And there's so we need a little bit of the New Testament and the Old Testament to decipher, but there's enough information for us to be able to decipher what the Lord's calendar does and should look like, and so that we can understand His appointed times, His days of His Sabbath days, which is which is the first appointed time that is defined. And all the other feast days, the appointed times, if we don't get the calendar right, we cannot observe the the appointed times on the correct days. We cannot have a rest day when the Lord is having a rest day if we don't understand His calendar. And He will be doing it on His calendar. He'll be making His major moves based on His appointed days, His calendar. And if we want to understand what He's doing, and we want to follow what He's doing, and understand some of the scriptural nuances within the scriptures, if we don't have the correct calendar, that a lot of that information is lost to our understanding. So I cannot stress the importance of this subject enough. Even though many people shy away from it, I'm going to try and keep it as simple as possible so that anybody, even with a non-technical understanding, can still understand what I'm basically getting to with regards to the calendar. So without any further ado, let me get to the document. Let me just get this out of the way. Okay, and this was the document that I was referring to. I titled it at the time Unscrambling the Calendars, which was literally that, getting through all the bits and pieces and understanding what each one of them was saying and measuring them up against my yardstick. And my yardstick are the scriptures. If it didn't comply with the scriptures, I rejected it, until I'd whittled it down to the point where this is the conclusion that I've come to, that I'm about to describe to you. So just as an introduction, we know that the Bible makes reference to dates throughout, and yet it doesn't provide an obvious detail of how the biblical calendar is determined. And I'm calling it a biblical calendar for a very specific reason, because there are different types of calendars. There's a solar calendar, there's a lunar calendar, there's a combination of solar and lunar calendar, but none of them on their own, in their own right, meet the requirements of what's defined in the scriptures. And only a calendar that meets every requirement of the scripture, in my view, can be called the biblical calendar. And so what I aim to do is to show you what the scriptures require in terms of the definition of the calendar, and why I believe that this is the only calendar that meets those requirements, and is the only true calendar, the only calendar that can be legitimately called the biblical calendar. Okay. Another reason why it's important is I believe that, as you will see by the title, I believe it's a matter of obedience. And the reason why I believe it's a matter of obedience is because of what it says here in Psalm 90, verses 11 and 12. It says, "Who knoweth the power of thy anger," referring to Yahweh. "Even according to thy fear so is thy wrath. So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom." So we see that the numbering of our days and how we understand the calendar, which is based on how the Lord numbers his days, we must be following on what he does. And it's linked to this concept of wrath, of anger and wrath. Why is that? Because this is an aspect, I believe, that the Lord is potentially upset about. The fact that, well, let me put it this way. I believe that the calendar is a test, is one of the tests of our obedience, our willingness to do it his way, as opposed to doing it our own way. There's many other areas that people do it their own way. They worship in their own way, and they live life according to their own way. But as we strive to live according to his ways and his paths, one of the areas that I believe is a critical test of our willingness to obey his word is in the calendar. This is an area that the enemy has attacked and caused confusion to such a degree that, and it's not a new thing. It's something that's been going on since since Abraham's days, through Moses' days, to the point where they'd even lost the true biblical calendar. God had to reset the calendar at the beginning of the Exodus. And again, through apostasy and through the years, new versions of the calendar have come about. But the Lord will always act according to the days on His calendar. And that's why I know that the day that Jesus was crucified for our sins, that day occurred on His calendar exactly according to His timing. And that the day that He was crucified, called Passover, was the true Passover, not man's decision as to when Passover should be, but it was, at that point in time, it was true and correct. And today's calendars, I can't say the same for it. I can't say where the days that we call, or that the Jews call Passover, or that many Christians call Passover, is the true Passover any longer. But the day that Jesus established that covenant with us, on that Passover, on that day, that was the true Passover. And our God is a powerful God, and He is able to, one, protect His calendar, two, He's able to protect His scriptures. He is able to deliver us with a full set of scriptures that are true and correct. In our scriptures, we have a true calendar. In our scriptures, we have a true biblical chronology that goes all the way from Adam to the very day that Jesus was baptized and the beginning of His ministry. And if we are willing to get into the scriptures, if we're willing to dig in, the information is there. I've done a number of series on the biblical chronology. I'm not going to cover it in this video, but please have a look at my channel. It's Ivan S128, and have a look at I don't have hundreds of videos, so you can just browse through. There's not a long list. You'll find the videos on the biblical chronology. It's a beautiful thing to see the information that the Lord has put in there for us. And yet, as Christians, as men, we've put our own chronology together from our own sources, from our own history, and we seek to do everything in our own strength, as opposed to relying and going back to the main true source for this information, and that is the Bible. And when we don't do so, we are in a state of disobedience, and that is no different for the calendar. When we start to make up our own calendar and decide what the calendar should look like based on our own understanding, then we are in danger of entering into area of disobedience from the perspective of His days, His appointed days. And if we don't do it the way He wants us to do it, we are out of line, and we need to come in line. And it does invoke it potentially invokes wrath, and thank God for His mercy and His grace that He's able to overlook these things and these errors in us. But notwithstanding, we are obliged and we are required to seek out the truth, and that's what we need to do with regards to the calendar also. So that's why we need to seek it. It's about wisdom, it's about obedience. And we ask the Lord right now to teach us to number our days. Just want to make a point that this particular verse comes right after the verses, Psalm 90, verse 10, where it speaks of the days of our lives are 70 and with strength 80, and then we soon fly away. We understand that is speaking of the end times. And right after that is probably one of the most important pieces of scripture with regard to end time understanding. Right after that, he says, "Teach us." He brings this verse where we're in fear and trepidation to avoid His wrath. We should be asking of Him to teach us how to number our days, so that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. So as a result of that, I've been searching out, and I just want to jump to, let me just see. So we see that the truth of the matter will be revealed in the fullness of time, what I'm about to show you. you may or may not accept, and I pray that you will go and seek it out for yourself, and then it'll become a personal revelation. But as I said, I do believe that the Lord will restore His calendar in this time, in these last days, certainly by the millennial reign. Okay, if we have a look at the definition of the calendar, what are some of the requirements with the biblical calendar? We see that its very first mention of what the calendar, the most fundamental requirements of the calendar is given to us in Genesis 1:14. And what the Lord is really saying to us is that this calendar, His calendar, His appointed days are based on the sun, moon, and stars. He says, this was Genesis 1:14. I'll just read there. And God said, "Let the lights be in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from night, and let them be for signs and for seasons," which means appointed times, or moedim, which is the feast days, and for days, as in an ordinary day and night, okay, and years. So these lights in the firmament are for signs, and to indicate when the appointed times are, and to indicate when the day starts and end, and to indicate when the years are and when the years start and end. Okay, so that's what they are for, the lights in the firmament. Goes on to say, Genesis 1:14 to 19, goes on to say, "And let them be for lights in the firmament of heaven, to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule by day, and the lesser light to rule by night. And He made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day." So these the sun, moon, and stars were created on the fourth day of creation in the 7-day creation story. And we've seen that they are created for the purpose of, first and foremost, to divide the day from the night. Now, I do believe that there's a spiritual connotation to this also. When it talks about darkness and light, we see throughout the word that darkness and light is synonymous of good and evil. So light referring to good, and evil being associated with the darkness. And I think that we can see here that what these lights in the firmament are symbolically and spiritually also not only separating the physical light from dark in this world, but are also separating the spiritual light from dark, or the spiritual righteous from unrighteous, the spiritual evil from good. And when we seek to understand His calendar, we are in fact dividing, we are seeking the righteousness of God. When we're seeking His light, we are dividing the unrighteous from the righteous. We are dividing His true way from the false way in seeking out His true calendar. So, and this controversy, I believe one of the reasons why there's such a mystery built into the calendar throughout the scriptures is for this very reason. It separates the good from the bad, the men from the boys, so to speak. So this is another reason why I think the calendar has been used by the enemy to such a large extent. He understands that this is an area that will cause men to fall, men to fail, men to become disheartened, men to discontinue seeking after the truth, and to fail to divide the right from the wrong, the righteous from the unrighteous, the light from the dark. So that's a spiritual aspect of it. Of course, the lights do mean the physical differentiation between these things. And then, of course, we see that, I just want to get back, signs. Let them be for signs. What is a sign? A sign, as we know, if we just think of a road sign, for example, it's either some sort of diagram, picture, some sort of symbol on a board. It could even be writing on a board. But it's nevertheless, we could categorize it basically as a picture, something that we can recognize as meaning, having a particular meaning. And when we see that picture or that symbol or that text, that name, we understand what that sign means and we react to it. And it occurs in all walks of life. We have different signs. So the sun, the moon, and the stars collectively are signs. But I do believe that there is that one of the three is actually even more so of a symbol, a symbolic sign, a symbol a picture that we can look at, and that is the stars. We see that in the constellations. They're forming patterns within in the heavens that we can recognize and we can create associations with. So just bear that in mind as we're going along. The importance of the signs aspect. Of course, the sun, we've got seasons. We've got the word seasons here is actually appointed times, which is the Moedim, which is the feast days. But of course, the sun also separates the agricultural or the climatic seasons throughout the year. And we know that the sun also divides the days. We know from one day to another based on the movement of the sun. We don't know the name of that day based on the sun. We need to refer to the moon. And I'll show you later that the moon defines what type of day it is. But the sun defines when it is, when it starts and when it ends. And then is, of course, the years. We've got a solar year. So the sun does a cycle of 365 and a quarter days to complete its cycle, to go from a reference point all the way back to the same reference point. We know that the moon has its own cycle. It's a cycle of 354 days to go from a specific reference point to come back to that same reference point. So it's a different duration of cycle. And then there's a couple of other cycles that we'll get into as well. But within those solar or lunar years, we need to find the calendar. Okay, and that's what we will get into some greater detail over here. All right, so we can safely say that the sun and the moon and the stars govern the Lord's calendar. And the thing that I always like to say about it is that the nice thing is nobody can muck with them. Nobody can genetically modify any crop that's going to affect the calendar. Nobody can change the movements or the speed of the sun or the speed of the moon or the location of the stars. Nobody can muck with his calendar. It is there. We can observe it. We can follow it. We can trust it. They are faithful witnesses, and they are not off course. We'll see some scriptures that confirm that. We just need to deal with this potential off-course issue that has crept in. That some believe that's the sun or the moon may be off course, and I just want to maybe touch on a few scriptures that maybe discount that possibility. In Enoch, for one, and we know Enoch is not part of our canon, but it is referred to from our biblical canon. So that means that Enoch can be trusted to a degree, and we need to measure what the book of Enoch has to say and we need to measure it against the scriptures. In fact, any of the books that are not in our biblical canon, some people say it was man-made choices as to what the 66 books were or are in our biblical canon. I believe the Lord has enough power and might to control his own book, and he has determined which books we can consider as biblical canon and inspired books. He's also left us with an array of books that we call the Apocrypha that provide us with additional information, and we need to take it with caution and measure it against what he's provided for us in terms of the biblical calendar, at least the biblical canon, the canon that we have. So we can refer to Enoch and see what Enoch had to say on the matter. He says that in Enoch 41 verse 5, he says, I saw the chambers of the sun and the moon, where they go, out and where they return, and their glorious return, and how one is more honored than the other is, and their magnificent course, and how they do not leave their course, neither adding nor subtracting from their course, and how they keep faith in one another, observing their oath. So as far as Enoch was concerned, the sun and the moon were perfectly on course and a true and faithful witness. We also see in Psalm 8 verse 3, it says, when I consider the heavens, the work of thy fingers, referring to Yahweh, work of his hands, okay, the work of thy hands and fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained. So we need to bear in mind that this is not just the sun, moon, and the stars are his handiwork, and they are a perfect work. He doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't make errors in the work that he does. He does everything for a reason. Okay, we will see now that in itself doesn't necessarily mean that they're gone, of course, but we just need to bear in mind we are criticizing, or we are potentially labeling what God has created as error in error, if we regard his work as having gone of course. We need to be careful about that, and we need to look at what some of the other scriptures have to say on the matter as well. We see in Psalm 89 verses 35 to 37, it says, once I have sworn by my holiness, this is Yahweh speaking, that I will not lie unto David. His seed shall endure forever. That seed is referring to Jesus, of course. And his throne as the sun before me. It shall be established forever as the moon, and as a faithful witness in heaven. So what he's saying in this verse is the establishment of the moon as a faithful witness in the heavens is synonymous with his word that the seed of David shall endure forever, and that his throne will be established before him. So he's comparing his promise of establishing his seed and his seed's throne to the faithfulness of the moon in the heaven. Now, if the moon was off course, then that would mean it would be telling a lie, which means that the Lord is potentially lying because he's comparing his word to something that's gone off course, and that's impossible. He is not a liar. There's no lie in him. If he's everything that he says is the truth. There is no darkness in him. There's no lie in him. And if he says that his seed shall be established and shall endure forever, and he can use something else as symbolic of that word, we better know and understand that thing that's being used as a symbol is not untrue. It is faithful and true, just as his word is faithful and true. Just sit and think about that a little bit. In fact, the word instructs us to just sit back and think about this a little bit. Think about it. Selah. Selah means just pause and think about what you've just read. So those that say that the sun and moon are gone on course need to be very, very careful about what they're saying. Because according to this verse, they're saying the Lord's word is potentially untrue. Now in Psalm 140, moving on, 104, verse 19, it confirms there that that's Yahweh, the Creator God, has appointed the moon for seasons. So this word is the Moedim, the feast days, and the sun knoweth his going down. So the moon is appointed to determine which days are the appointed days. So like I said earlier, the sun determines the start and end of a day, but the naming of that day What type of day it is determined by the moon. And the sun is in understanding of this. So the sun knoweth he's going down. So we can see from scripture that the moon is a faithful witness, and the moon determines what day it is, when the appointed times are in the month. So the moon determines the beginning and the end of the month and the type of days within that month. So let me just, I think that's important. We need to understand that. There's a few things that I'm just going to skip through there. The next thing that we, so there are some that contend that apocryphas such as Enoch and Jubilees advocate that a solar-based calendar and that the moon ought not to be a factor in determining the true biblical calendar. But we can see from these scriptures that the Bible is clear that all the luminaries are to be used. And we need to understand that the Bible defines 3 types of days. We will get into this a little bit more detail later. But the 3 days that are clearly defined in the Bible are new moon days, work days, and appointed times, of which the Sabbath day is one of the appointed times. Okay, so there are 3 types of days: new moon days, work days, and appointed days or appointed times, Moedim. Okay, so we will touch on that a bit later on in terms of the where we can find in the scriptures that those 3 days are clearly defined as the only 3 types of days. And any calendar that doesn't have these 3 types of days is not based on scripture, is not in line with scripture. So for example, the Jews calendar, the Hebrew calendar, whatever you want to call it, you will see that they've got work days and they've got Sabbath days. They don't have new moon days. So that calendar already is out of line with the scriptures. There's no new moon days. They don't label any of their days as new moon days, only work days and Sabbath days. So that's clearly wrong. Any calendar that doesn't have all 3 days, we can safely disregard. Okay, so at this point we can safely conclude that the true biblical calendar is governed by the cycle of the sun together with the moon's, with the moon, in particular the moon's phases, read against the backdrop of the stars. Now, I will still deal with the stars aspect of it, but we know from thus far with the scriptures that we've covered, our calendar, our biblical calendar, must include all 3 aspects, must include the sun, moon, and stars. Okay, and we need to understand how they work together to form the calendar. That is what we aim to define as we go through this. The cycles of the sun, moon, and the cycle of the sun and the moon are not described in our biblical canon. In book of Enoch, we've got a very detailed, clear description of the cycle of the sun and the cycle of the moon, and those are, you will find them, they're referred to as the description of the luminaries in Enoch chapters 72, 73, and 74. And I'm not going to in this video go through the detail of those chapters. So please, in your own time, feel free to go and read through them. I have done some videos, detailed videos on the Enoch's description of the luminaries. Please, I encourage you, if you want to get into understanding Enoch's description, you need to go and see those videos. We know that they are true and correct, even though Enoch there's probably some areas where the book of Enoch has been altered and corrupted. The one thing we can do is, when we follow the description of the movement of the luminaries in these chapters, we can match them up perfectly to what we observe today. And the easiest way to do so is to use a program like Stellarium to track the movements and compare them with an understanding. Now, some of the descriptions, the words used to describe the movements, like gates or doors and windows in Enoch, are a little bit difficult to understand until you know what they are, what they're referring to. And so I go in detail on the video as to what the doors or gates are, because he refers to going through the fourth gate, and then the fifth gate, the sixth gate, and the first, all the various number of gates. There's 6 gates. And he refers to 12 windows. So if you understand that the windows are in fact the constellations, and the gates are in fact are the lines of latitude above and below the equator, then you're able to follow the movements of the sun and the moon in relation to those markers using a program like Stellarium. Now, we know that in the book of Enoch there's some places where it refers to the cycle of the sun being 364 days, whereas we know for a fact by measurement that the cycle of the sun is 365 and a quarter days. And there are other places in Enoch where it does refer to 365 days as well. So that's indicative of the fact that there are parts of the book of Enoch that have been altered. There is some corruption within Enoch. Alright, but with regards to the sun and the moon cycles, we know for a fact that the cycle of the sun in relation to the stars is 365 and a quarter days. And we also know that the cycle of the moon in relation to the stars is 354.36 days, and that the phases of the moon are completed in a twelfth of the cycle. So in other words, 354.36 divided by 12 will be as 29.53 days for the completion of the phases of the moon. So it goes through a cycle of phases within a period of 29.53 days, and it completes 12 of those cycles in a space of 354.36 days. Okay, those are things that we can go and measure today, and we can determine it for a fact. And in fact, even in Enoch, he confirms that the cycle of the moon is 29 stroke 30, sometimes 29 and sometimes 30 days. I think there is, later on we will be covering some of that. Let's just see the sun. So we know that according to the observation of nature, that the sun governs the year and its seasons, and it's confirmed in Jubilees. Now this is an interesting little part in Jubilees where it goes beyond, it's in direct contravention or directly opposed to what the scriptures have to say on the matter. In Jubilees chapter 2 verse 9, we see that Yahweh appointed the sun to be a great sign on the earth for the days. And now I believe this part was added in because it goes on to say that the sun was appointed for days and for Sabbaths and for months and for feasts and for years and for Sabbaths of years and for Jubilees and for all the seasons of the year. Now, there is no way that you can follow the sun and just by looking at the sun, there's no way that you can determine when the Sabbath years start. Now it's talking about the 7 year cycles, the Shemitah years, the seven cycles of 7 years will make up a Jubilee, which is the 50th year. So it's seven cycles, 749 years, and then the first year of the next cycle, which is also the 50th year of the current cycle, is a Jubilee. There's no way that you can read the sun on its own to determine the beginning and end of those Sabbath years or when the Jubilee is. It's impossible. So this was clearly altered. Clearly somebody really wanted to take the importance of the sun beyond what it can actually do for us on its own. So there's no ways, but certainly it is a great sign, and it does determine the days, and it certainly does determine the seasons. I'm talking about the climatic seasons, the winter, summer, winter, spring, and autumn. Certainly, that is governed by the sun, which is governed. Those seasons are governed by the position of the sun in relation to the surface of the earth. But as for the rest, no. Psalm that we looked at it earlier is 104 verse 19. He appointed the moon for seasons and the sun knows. So that is in direct opposition to what Jubilees 2 has to say on the matter. So I will take what Psalm 104:19 has to say on the matter over Jubilees, because of the possibility of Jubilees having been corrupted. And I believe there's enough evidence that there are many aspects of Jubilees that have been altered, but there is something that there are pieces that we can still glean from to expand our understanding. Okay, so going back to Enoch, we know that Enoch went to great lengths to describe the cycle of the moon and how it fills its parts in cycles of 7 days. So I'm not going to read through all of it, but clearly the moon phases were intended to mark the Sabbath weeks and the Sabbath day, understanding that the Sabbath weeks and the Sabbath days are in a cycle of 7 days, and the moon cycle is also in a cycle of 7 days, as explained in great detail in Enoch, and which we can observe with our own eyes. We can just go there and follow the phases of the moon and count the number of days between the dark moon, the quarter moon, the full moon, the last quarter, and then of course the back to dark moon. We know it comes in cycles of 7 days. Okay, so there's not a single verse in the Bible that actually tells us how many days there are in a month. So there has to be a mechanism to determine the number of days in a month, and we'll get onto that now. Enoch did confirm that there are two types of months, that there are some months that are 30 days in length and that there are some months that are 29 days in length. In 15, right, we see that in Enoch, he says, with referring to the moon, he says, and 3 months she makes of 30 days, so 3 of her months are 30 days that she makes. So the moon marks the beginning and end of the months, and 3 of those months have 30 days in it. At the time when she makes 3 months of 29 days each, which is accomplished in her waning in the first period of time, and in the first door of 177 days. So what he's really these things are a little bit convoluted sometimes in the interpretation, but what he's saying here is that in that period, that first period of 177 days of the year, which goes from spring to spring, from spring to autumn, is 177 days, and within that time, 3 of the months have 30 days and 3 of the months have 29 days. It doesn't tell us which of those months have 29, so it's not necessarily 3 consecutive months of 30 and then 3 consecutive months of 29. He's just saying 3 of those 6 months are 30 days and 3 of the 6 months are 29 days. And then he goes on to say that in the time of going out, this is now during the winter, this is now from fall to spring, she appears 3 months consisting 30 days each, and she appears for 3 months consisting 29 each. So again, within the next 6 months, they are split evenly between 30 and 29 days. So Enoch confirms that we've got these 2 lengths of days. We don't have any similar confirmation in the biblical canon, so we have to rely on the sun and the moon and the stars defining which months are 29 days and which months are 30 days. Okay, then at this point we can confidently conclude that both the sun and the moon, against the backdrop of the stars, are used to determine the structure of the biblical calendar, whereby the sun directly governs the seasons and indirectly the years. In other words, we've got, when I say indirectly, what I mean is it has its own year. The moon cycle has its own year, but together they will define the biblical year. Okay, so the sun has a part to play in the definition of the years, but not directly. The days and appointed times, of course, but the moon, but the moon directly governs the months, the days, and the appointed times. Sorry, this appointed time shouldn't be here. Let's actually just take that out. So that the years and days, but the moon directly governs the months. So the start and end of the months, the duration of the months, it defines the type of days as to what type of, whether they're a new moon day, a work day, or a appointed time. And the moon is subservient to the sun, and yet plays a vital role in determining the biblical calendar. So the two really work together. We need to understand. So because they've got different cycles, there has to be a way to bring them together to deal with this difference in duration. The one being 354 odd days, and the other one being 365. So you've got this 11 odd days difference between the cycles, and there has to be a means of bringing them together so that we can understand when the biblical year begins and ends. And we will see later, as we explain later in this book, we deal with the metonic cycle. And the metonic cycle is the mechanism by which the two cycles are brought together in sync. That is the sun cycle and the moon's cycle. At this point, I just want to introduce you to the concept that's referred to as the precession of the seasons. We see that there are 4 seasons. If we go and read the book of Enoch, he also describes that, and we are fairly familiar with the concept. There are 4 seasons in the years: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And that what happens is that the start and end of those seasons, or the position in which those seasons occur, we can refer to the cardinal points would be the equinoxes and the solstices. We've got the summer solstice, the winter solstice, we've got the spring equinox and the fall equinox, and the position of those cardinal points, they shift by about 30 days over in relation to the position of the stars. So if we had to measure them in relation to the position of the stars over a period of 2,166 years, that position shifts by 30 days, about 30 days. So that means the equinox in Jesus' day, for example, the equinox in Jesus' day, the spring equinox occurred when in Aries. The position of it was in Aries, but now 2,000 years later, the position of the equinox is in Pisces. We need to also understand that the equinox is a function of the sun in relation to the Earth's surface. It's not a function of the stars at all. So its position, or we can measure it in relation to the stars, but its measurement is its function, the way its cycle is a function of the relationship between the sun and the earth, not a function of the relationship between the sun and the stars. So we can observe its position in relation to the stars. So we see that it's moved by 30 days over the last 2,000 years, and it will continue to do so in terms of the precession of the seasons. So the seasons shift. In other words, if you had to go through 12 times 2,166 years, which would be whatever, 26,000 years, then the seasons will have gone through all 12 constellations and done a full circle. In fact, so about 26,000 years to complete. So that means the spring would occur under every single constellation of each of the 12 constellations because of this precession over a period of 26,000 years, and then it would start again from the beginning and go through all the constellations again over each cycle of 26,000 years. Okay, so the solar year and the biblical year, we need to understand right now, this is very important. The solar year and the biblical year are not the same thing, and this is where so many people come unstuck. Now I want to just deal with this whole controversial issue of whether the new moon is the full moon or the dark moon. Those are the two main schools of thought. Some would advocate, according to Psalm 81, that the new moon is the full moon, and so that of course would change the beginning of the month by a space of 14-15 days. So we need to understand what is the true biblical calendar look like. Does the true biblical calendar use the full moon, define the full moon as being the new moon, or does it define the dark moon as being the full moon? I disagree with some people using Psalm 81 as defining the new moon as being full moon. If you read Psalm 81, you'll see, if you read it objectively, you'll see that it's simply describing when the trumpet is to be blown. In the new moon, in the full moon, at the appointed times, the feast days, those, so basically the trumpet was blown every 7 days. On new moon day, 7 days later it would be blown on the 8th day of the month. On Sabbath day, which is an appointed day, it would be blown at every feast day. So that's what Psalm 81 is really just doing. You cannot come to the conclusion that the new moon is a full moon based on that. If we go to Enoch, and what does Enoch have to say on the matter? If you read in Enoch chapter 78, where he describes the number of days it takes to attain light. So when we go to Enoch, we see that he describes the moon as from when that it goes from it having no light, when he describes it from having zero light to attaining full light over the first 14-15 days, and then goes back to from full light to darkness over the next 14-15 days. So he's really just describing that. Doesn't say whether it starts on new moon or full moon, but the description in itself is telling that the cycle of the moon begins at dark, goes to full, and then goes back to dark again. He later on in Enoch chapter 10, in 1 Enoch 10, we see that we'll read there that he describes that he's describing the position of the sun in relation to the phases of the moon, and I'll just jump to what he says in chapter 12, in verse 12, where he says, "On the first day she is called new moon, and for on that day the light rises on her," so it begins to shine on her. She becomes full exactly on the day when the sun sets in the west, and from the east she rises at night. So in other words, so she goes from dark to being full, and her fullness occurs when she rises in the east as the sun is setting in the west. That would be the point at which she's fully lit. Then when they are diagonally opposite each other on the horizon, and then the moon shines a whole night through until the sun rises against her on the other side opposite her, and the moon is seen over against the sun again. So in other words, the whole night she's full, And then just as she's about to set, the sun rises, and again they are on opposite ends. And that was the night of the fully lit moon. So this clearly, the new moon was the dark person. So the dark moon. The new moon was the dark moon when there's no light, and then she attains her light to full moon, and then she goes by. So nobody can argue that Enoch considered the dark moon to be the new moon. We can see on in verse 14, it goes on to say, on the side hence, on the side whence the light of the moon comes out, the side where the light begins to diminish, there again she wanes until the light vanishes. All the days of the month are at an end. So when the light has vanished, so from full moon to dark moon, by the time all the light is vanished and the sphere of her is empty and void, then that's the end of the month. Okay. So he not only just always when he describes the phases of the moon, he starts with the full moon, starts with a dark moon, goes through a full moon, and then ends in a dark moon. He clearly states that new moon is a dark moon, and the end of the month is the dark portion again. So anybody who has to say that Enoch describes the new moon as being a full moon is being completely disingenuous and misleading. He's clearly not. But then some would argue again, okay, that's not canon and can be trusted. Well, this is what I have to say on the matter. We need to look to nature. We need to look to what the Creator has created. And I will put a challenge out to anybody who's watching this video. Send me an example, just one example, where in our Lord's creation, He goes from full bloom to nothing, back to full bloom. There is nothing that I can think of that does that. Everything, but everything in His creation goes from nothing to full bloom, back to nothing. Even the days of our lives, we start off as nothing, we attain full bloom, and then we then wane off to nothing again. We see that in the animal kingdom, we see it in the plant kingdom. It starts off as a seed, it grows to a full tree, and eventually it wanes to nothing again. So every single thing in His creation goes from nothing to full bloom, back to nothing again. There is absolutely no reason why He would have the moon cycle being completely opposite to every single thing else in His creation. No. The moon cycle goes exactly the same, from no light to full light, back to no light. From nothing to full bloom, back to nothing again. The cycle of the moon is just like all the rest of His creation. And when we understand that, He's the common factor, He's the designer of the system. And we see that being common throughout His entire creation. Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, there's enough evidence to prove that the new moon is the dark moon, and that full moon is in the middle of the month. Okay, we need to deal with this metonic cycle thing, and this was something that was very interesting to have discovered. It's all to do with dealing with the difference in the cycle of the sun versus the moon, that 11 days difference, where the moon is 354 and the sun is 365, and you've got the 11-day difference. So, which is about equal to a day per month. Now, there is no way that we can cancel out that day per month difference. I just want to deal with this a little bit. In a way that is not offensive. If you try to cancel that 1 day difference in the speed of the sun versus the moon, you will cancel out the phases of the moon. In other words, if the moon and the sun moved at the same speed, and they both completed a number of cycles, the same number of cycles in a month, there would be no phases in the moon. It would be stuck on one phase, whatever that phase might be, full moon or half moon or whatever phase. If wherever it is, if they rotated if their movement was exactly the same in duration of cycle in a month, there would be 0 phases. Just think about that a little bit. You cannot cancel that 1 day difference per month in the cycle speed of the sun versus the moon. It's there for a reason, and the reason is that it creates it creates the phases of the moon. You can't cancel it out. It has to be there, and it has to be dealt with in terms of the calendar. So we know that a solar year is 365, a lunar year is 354, and if you follow like the Muslims follow, what happens then is, because of the 11-day difference, if you follow the moon only as determining the beginning and end of the months, then what happens is your seasons or your months move. The beginning of your year moves through the seasons of through the winter, spring, summer, autumn, winter cycles by the space of about a month every 3 years. So you will find that the beginning of the year won't always be at spring. It'll move through into winter, and so within 9 years or so it'll have moved through winter into the autumn, and another 9 years or so it would have moved through the autumn into summer. So the beginning of the year will shift through the seasons, and that happens on their calendar because they use the moon only to determine their beginning and the end of their year. So if you do as the Gregorian calendar does, you ignore the cycle of the moon altogether, and you base your year entirely on the cycle of the sun, 365. That's fine. Your seasons will remain static, but you will not be starting the year at its correct place. Your beginning, your solar months, because you get solar months also, of course. A cycle of just like the moon's cycle can be split into 12 portions, the solar cycle can also is split into 12 portions, and those 12 portions are actually described by Enoch, where they are 30 and 31 days, and he describes them as solar months, as a portion, a 12th of the total solar cycle. So you have solar months and you get lunar months. But we know that the lunar months are what governs the naming of the days, determine what type of day it is. So how do we actually reconcile these? We know that the sun controls the cycle of the seasons, and if we do as the Muslims do, we run into a problem. If we do as those that advocate a solar calendar do, they're excluding the moon from their calendar, and scripturally it's incorrect. So there is one. So the Gregorian calendar is and the Julian calendar and those type of calendars are essentially solar calendars. The Muslims' calendar is essentially a lunar calendar, and then we've got the Jews' calendar, which is a combination of the solar and the lunar cycles, and they correct their year for that difference of 11 days. In the two cycles, by making an adjustment, adding an extra month every approximately 2 to 3 years. But they do so on a specific pattern, and I discovered at the time when I researched that they do it based on what is called the Metonic cycle. It's a period of 19 years. And this 19 years, during that 19 years, the moon will complete 235 lunar months, 235 cycles in that 19 years. And those 235 cycles will bring it back to the point where the moon is on its exact same phase at the exact same place in relation to the stars. So it takes 19 years for that to happen. 235 lunar cycles. And so what they discovered, that if they make the adjustment, they would make an adjustment for the 13th month within that cycle in the third year, the 6th year, the 8th year, the 11th year, the 14th year, the 17th year, and the 19th year of the Metonic cycle. So we can see there's 3 years apart there, 2 years apart there, 3 years apart there, 3 years apart there, 3 years apart there, and then 2 years apart there. So every 2 to 3 years they would add extra month, and that would ensure that you don't get a drifting of the beginning of the year too far away from the spring. So the beginning of the year would remain at more or less at springtime. So at first I was rather concerned about this because it seemed like a man-made adjustment, and there's no biblical description of such an adjustment, and it started becoming a question in my mind as to whether the 13th month is legitimate or not, or is it a man-made thing. And it was only when I started looking at the solar, the sun and the moon in relation to the stars, and understanding that this Metonic cycle was actually not a man-made thing. It was governed by the movements of the sun and moon in relation to the stars. In other words, if you start the year and you use a particular sign in the heavens, a picture, a constellation, in other words, if a constellation marked the beginning of the year, then the sun and the moon and stars would actually dictate when the 13th month was to be added, so that the year always starts with that particular sign in the heavens, or that picture. So if I just want to get into, so in other words, I'll give you an example. Let's just say the year starts when the constellation Virgo is visible in the east. If we get to the end of the 12th month and we don't see Virgo yet, then we would know that we must wait another month for Virgo to rise above the east so that it would be visible, and that would be the beginning of the new year. And if, however, Virgo was, at the end of the 12th month, Virgo was visible in the east, then we could continue with the start and call that particular moment, the beginning of that month, the beginning of the new year. So that would, when it's based, in other words, when you base the position of the sun and the moon, so we want to see a new moon, a dark moon. In other words, the dark moon occurs when the sun and the moon are in constellation, are in conjunction with each other. So when they're together, there's no light on the moon. When they opposite each other, as Enoch described, then the moon is at full moon. And then when the moon comes back together in conjunction with the sun, it's dark moon again. So we want to see, for a beginning of any month, we want to see a dark moon. In other words, we want to see a sun and moon in conjunction with each other. And then we know that is the beginning of a month. But now we need to know which month is it the beginning of? Is it the beginning of the first month, the second month, third month, etc.? Which month is it? And the constellation that's visible in the east determines and marks which month it is. So it's the stars that mark which months we're actually in. And we've lost sight of that. We've lost the ability to look up and understand when we see a particular constellation rising east, which month it marks. But if we can get back into that, and it's when I discovered, and when I tracked the calendar based on using the stars as the marking point of when the year begins, I then discovered that that controlled exactly when the 13th month should be added. And then I discovered that the sun and the moon and stars, the Metonic cycle, is actually that extra month that was added based on the position of the sun, moon, and stars actually occurred exactly on the 3rd, 6th, 8th, 11th, 14th, 17th, and 19th day of the Metonic cycle. And then it started all over again. From 19, it would wait 3 months again and start all over again. This exactly the same cycle. And then when I realized that what the Jews were doing is they picked up on this Metonic cycle based on dictated and governed by the sun, moon, and stars. But what they had started doing is they were applying the correct spacing of the adding of the 13th month, but they weren't in sync. They were doing so, and they're doing so in a way that's not in sync with the true Metonic cycle that's determined by the sun, moon, and stars. So they're out of sync. And the reason why they're out of sync is they don't follow the stars. In the calendar of the Jews, they follow the sun and the moon, and they use that as a combination, and they add the 13th month, but they do so based on the equinox. So they add their 13th month so that they can make sure that their Passover occurs shortly after the equinox. You know, it's the first full moon that occurs after the spring equinox. They would regard that as the true Passover, and they would adjust the beginning of the year so that occurs. And sometimes it requires adding a 13th month to get to the point where the full moon just after the equinox is the Passover. So they're applying the principle of the Metonic cycle, but they're applying it incorrectly. And they're applying it based on the equinox. And the equinox, as I said earlier, is not a function of the stars, it's a function of the sun and the earth. So it is not something that we should be using to determine the beginning of the year, as the Jews do. We must be looking at the stars as the reference point to determine the beginning of the year. So all this started bringing me to the point where I understood that the 13th month is a biblical cycle. It is biblical to add a 13th month because it's governed by the sun, moon, and stars. And Genesis 1:14 tells us that the sun, moon, and stars determine the calendar. So and when I started looking into evidence for a 13th month, I found 2 places in the Bible where there's evidence that there must have been a 13th month. The first one is in the story of Ezekiel, when he had to lie on his side as a demonstration in front of a model of Jerusalem. He had to lie on his side for 390 days, and then he had to lie on his side for another 40 days, totaling 430 days. And we know that the beginning of that whole cycle was that 340 days plus 7 days, because he just out of interest, if you go read Ezekiel from chapter 1, you'll see that there are 2 up to, I think it's from Ezekiel 1 to chapter 6, if I remember correctly, the whole story is in there. There's 2 dates given. The first date is the 5th day of the 4th month, and the final date at the end of the demonstration is, if I'm speaking under correction now, it's given as the 5th day of the 6th month. So the whole story of his demonstration, the vision of the Lord that he sees, the Lord's throne room, well, not the throne, but the mobile throne that I believe he saw, that's described in Ezekiel 1, is that vision that he sees occurs on the 5th day of the 4th month. He then has 7 days of where he's astonished. So on the 12th day of the 4th month, he's then given instruction to make a model of Jerusalem and to demonstrate the siege and destruction of Jerusalem over a period of 430 days. And the whole saga ends where he's now in his home at the end of that, and it's the 5th day of the 6th month. So when you take the 7 days and the 430 days, so it's 437 days, and you try and fit that number of days between the 5th month of between the 5th day of the 4th month in a particular year through to the 5th day of the 6th month in the same year, the following year, sorry, because there's 437 days, so it would take us through to the following year. Obviously, it can't be just a few. It can't be just from the 4th month to the 6th month of the same year. There definitely not be enough days. So it would be from the 5th day of the 4th month in one year through to the 5th day of the 6th month in the following year. And if you can take whatever calendar you want, you cannot on the cycle of the sun calendar, the whatever they want to call it, the Enoch calendar, the Zendok calendar, the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, you can take them all. None of them can fit in 437 days. It's impossible. The only calendar that can fit in 437 days between those two dates is a sun, moon and stars calendar, where it was a long year and it had a 13th month. In other words, it went that particular year in which Ezekiel had to do the demonstration was a 13-month year, and there were enough days between those two dates to actually fit that story in. Otherwise, and we know that scripture cannot be broken. So that was a clear demonstration that of a year which had 13 months in it, in order to cater for the scriptural evidence that was given to us. The other place is in the story of Noah's flood. When you add up all the days that are given, that in the description of that story, we know that it starts on the 17th day of the 2nd month, and it ends on the 27th day of the 2nd month the following year. So we know it's a year and 10 days. But when you add up all the days that are described in the story, it comes to a total of 394 days. Now, again, none of the calendars, Zendok, Dead Sea, Enoch, whatever you want to call all those calendars, none of them can cater for that. There's only one calendar that can cater for it, and that's the sun, moon and stars for a 13-month year will cater for a 394 day period, because a long year is 384 days, and you take 384 plus the extra 10 days, 394 days. The Noah story only matches the sum of the days that are described in the Noah flood story. It's only supported by a 13th month year situation. So there's two instances in the Bible where there had to be a 13th month in the particular year where those events occurred. And so I know for a fact, I'm certain that scripturally there must be a 13th month. You must add a 13th month from time to time, and the thing that governs when we add it is the sun, moon and stars. When you measure your year to start in a particular constellation, and I'm going to get into that now, as to what is it that actually determines the beginning of the year. So that's the whole story of the Metonic cycle. We need to just wrap up on the structure of the month. We know that there's 3 types of days. I did mention to you earlier on that I was going to point out to this. We see that in Ezekiel chapter 46 verse 1, he said, This is what it was. This was the whole description of the temple and when the gates would be open. The temple and when this was all the description of when the temple gates would be open. And he said, and thus saith Yahweh God, the gate of the inner court that looketh towards east shall be shut the 6 working days, but on the Sabbath it shall be opened, and on the day of the new moon it shall be opened. So there we see 3 days defined: on the working days, the Sabbath days, and the new moon days. 3 days decided, all in one verse. There's no debate. There's 3 types of days in the Bible, and so we need to now. We've already spoken about the 29 or 30 days, and that's all based on the cycle of the moon. And what I discovered in the process of looking at that, we can calculate the position of the sun, moon, and stars in relation, the position of the sun and the moon in relation to the stars for any day, going forward thousands of years and going backwards thousands of years. We can also calculate the age of the moon on any particular day, going thousands of years backwards and forwards. And I discovered that when you round up the age of the moon to the nearest whole number, it actually reflected the number of the day that we were looking at in a particular month. From 1 to 29 in some instances, and automatically it would be from 1 to 30 in other instances, and they just mathematically calculated to alternate between 30. So you had 30, then 29, 30, 29, 30, 29, alternating between the length of each of the days. And again, so this is an aspect that's governed by the phase of the moon. It's not it's not for man to decide whether there should be 29 or 30 days. The moon decides whether there's 29 or 30 days in a particular cycle. I just want to just highlight, express on this is something that I also covered in greater detail. The whole calculation of the calendar and all that type of thing. I did some videos on that, so I don't want to go into all that detail in the spreadsheet and that I created and how I did it. It's all in those videos. So if you want to get into the detail of those calculations and how it all works, you should go and have a look at those videos. Okay, so we now need to decide is how do we see that we've got a situation, we've got 29 or 30 days. So we know that there's in some months there's an extra day, and we know that we know that the beginning of the month must be a new moon, and I'm going to get into some of that now as to how we know that the first day of the month must be a new moon. And sometimes there's 2 days, let's say between the changeover of a month, between the end of a particular month and the beginning of the next month. Sometimes there's 1 new moon day, and sometimes there's 2 new moon days. So when there's 1 new moon day, then we would have 29 days in the month, comprising of 1 new moon day and 28 or 4 cycles of let's call it Sabbath cycles. 4 Sabbath cycles, each Sabbath cycle comprising 6 working days and a Sabbath rest, and then another 6 working days and a Sabbath rest, and there's 4 of those in every single month. So that would be a total of 28 days. But the first day would be a new moon day, so that's a total of 29 days. And then sometimes we've got you've got this extra new moon day. And so what I've done is, I believe that it is correct as well, that we tag that extra new moon day onto the end of the 1 month, so that the next month, the second new moon day becomes the first day of the next month. So, but the point we need to do is there any scriptural evidence of 2 new moon days in a row, not just 1? So that there is from time to time 1, and from time to time 2 new moon days. And I think we can prove that there is sometimes 2 new moon days in the story of that's described between between David and Jonathan, when David wanted to prove to Jonathan that Saul really sought to destroy him and to kill him. And that story is in 1 Samuel 20. We'll just see it there. David said unto Jonathan, Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at meat. So what happened was, on new moon days were actually days when they got together and had a feast as well. So it's not an appointed day, but they did get together as a formal feast day, and they would blow the trumpet, etc. So it's and strange enough, it's not even described in the scriptures as to what is supposed to be done on a new moon day, but there's hints of it being an observed day. I'd like to think of it as kind of like what we refer to as in the Western culture, we have a Saturday and a Sunday. Okay, Sunday is set aside for the holy day, but the Saturday is also usually a day off from work. It's not a work day for most, and but it's also not a rest day. So it's like so you have a 2-day weekend. The Saturday is a day off, and then Sunday is the rest day that Christians would go to church. Not saying that those are the true Sabbath days and etc. But the new moon day is kind of like a Saturday, not in the Hebrew calendar sense. On the Hebrew calendar, of course, they see Saturday as their rest day, as their Sabbath, Saturday, but Friday would be in Israel. Friday would be kind of like our equivalent of a Saturday. So you have this situation where at the end of some months we would have a rest so the Lord built into his calendar a rest after every 6 days of work. At the end of the month some months we would have 2 days off. We would have the Sabbath rest, and then the next day would be new moon day, which is just like a normal another rest day, but not a Sabbath day as such, but a day off work. And then we would start work on the second day of the month. So we had 2 days off. So you would work, you'd have 4 single days and then a double day off. And then every alternate month you would have 3 days off, which would be the rest day, the Sabbath day, the last Sabbath of the month, plus 2 new moon days, which would both be rest. And then you start on the first working day, which would be the second day of the month. So every alternate month we would get a 3-day weekend, so to speak. So it would be a 2-day weekend and then a 3-day weekend at the end of every month. And then, of course, there's the feast days, which you have several days off. We have up to 7-8 days off for the two, in fact, the 2 main appointed. Passover would be 7 days off, and then, of course, at the time of Tabernacles is the time of another 7 days off. So within God's biblical calendar, we've got all these days of rest that are built in. And and they're well structured. The 2 long ones are 6 months apart, and all the others are 7 days apart. And at the end of each month, we either get a 2-day off or a 3-day off. So it's a very well structured calendar. If you follow it correctly, he's built in enough rest days for us. So they would actually get together, and this was one of those instances that David was describing, that tomorrow is the new moon, and he would be sitting with a king to have a meal with the king, and but he said, "Let me go that I may hide myself in the field unto the 3rd day." So he says, tomorrow is the new moon, but let me hide myself unto the 3rd day. We'll see why it was 3 days now. So then Jonathan said unto David, tomorrow is the new moon, and thou shalt surely be missed. Thou shalt be missed, because thy seat will be empty. And when thou hast stayed 3 days, then thou shalt go quickly and come to the place where thou didst hide thyself when the business hide thyself when the business was in hand, and shalt remain by the stone easel. And the king, okay, I'm just going to jump to 1 Samuel 20 verse 5. And the king sat upon his seat as at other times, in other words, other new moon days, even upon a seat by the wall, and Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, and David's place was empty. Okay, so that's really just confirming. Then jumping to verse 27, and it came to pass on the morrow, which was the second day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said unto Jonathan his son, Wherefore cometh not the son of Jesse to meet, neither yesterday nor today? So there's 2 days that he was supposed to sit with the king, and he didn't, and he wasn't present, and he's now questioning it. And then when we read that whole story, we see his reaction to the whole situation. But we need to get into this, and it came into this, what is described here as, and it came to pass on the morrow, which was the second day of the month, is a very bad translation, because the translators actually insert day, and they use this word here. So I just want to get into what I believe to be the correct translation here for these 2 words. First of all, there is no yom, there's no day, and this word month can also be translated as new moon, and is in many places. This H2302 is translated new moon, and I believe that it should actually have been the verse should have read that it came to pass on the morrow, the second new moon. So that's how, if you do away with this yom that they inserted, and you change this to new moon, this word H2302, then it reads, and it was the second new moon that David's place was empty. And that, I believe, is the true, and that's why there were 3 days. The first new moon he wasn't there, and the second new moon he wasn't there, and that was there's evidence in this that there were 2 new moon days. Both days were supposed to be feast days, and he was supposed to be in the presence of the king for those feast days. So that's the one place where we have to cater for the possibility, according to scriptures, in my view, that there are sometimes 2 new moon days, and the only calendar that caters for that is the sun, moon, and stars, that provides for the possibility and the occurrence of 2 new moon days. So from the above, we can conclude that the structure of the biblical month is either 29 or 30 days, and wherein there are 4 Sabbath weeks, and a Sabbath week comprising 6 working days and the 7th day of rest, totaling 28 days, and the remaining 1 or 2 days being new moon days. Okay. So if we're now getting on to what days of the month are the Sabbath days. Now, I do believe that the Sabbath days are marked by the phases of the moon. In other words, when once the month has started after new moon day, the dark moon, once you get the first sliver, which announces the first working day, which the first working day will be the second day of the month. So we work for 6 days, and then the 7th day, the day of rest, would actually be the 8th day of the month, and then you would work another 6 days, and then the second Sabbath day of the month would actually fall on the 15th day of the month, and then you work another 6 days, and the third Sabbath day of the month would fall on the 22nd day of the month, and you work another 6 days, and then the 4th and final Sabbath day of the month would actually occur on the 29th day of the month. So that would happen if the first day of every month is a new moon day. Is there any evidence to support that the Sabbaths fall on the 8th, 15th, 22nd and 29th, or is that just our man-made choice? And that's what we need to establish, and I believe that there is enough evidence in the story of Exodus, in Exodus 16. When we go and read there, we read that this is the event of the quail and the manna, that was where the Israelites complained to Moses, and they said that they were hungry and they'd rather go back to Egypt than die out here in the desert. And so Moses goes and he goes to the Lord with their complaint, and this is what happens. So that we read the story, we see that it was on the 15th month of the second month. So Exodus 16, 1 and 2, and they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came into the wilderness of Sin, which is Elim and Sinai, and on the 15th day of the second month, after their departure out of the land of Egypt, and the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. So I think the important thing is to note that this particular complaint that happened on the 15th day of the second month. So it goes on to say in verse 16:4, then said the Lord. So Moses goes up to and prays to the Lord about it. Okay, so we 16:4. Then said the Lord unto Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or no. And I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. Speak unto them, saying, At even ye shall eat flesh, and in the morning ye shall be filled with bread, and ye shall know that I am the Lord your God. Okay, so this happened on the 15th day of the second month. Now, later on we'll get into when does the day end and when does the day begin. Now, we see here that at evening the flesh came, and in the morning the bread came. And we need to understand, why did it come in the evening and not earlier? So they complained on the 15th. If it was a Sabbath day, if it was, okay, then the Lord wouldn't work on that day, okay? So there's a reason why I provided the flesh in the evening, which was the beginning of the next day. Okay, we will get to this. You just bear with me for a second. We need to take note that the quail came in the evening, and the next morning was the bread. Okay, so in the evening then it goes on to say, Ezekiel 16:22, and it came to pass on the sixth day. So they started gathering the bread. So they started gathering the manna every single day for 6 days. And then it goes on to say that it came to, in 16:22-27, it came to pass that on the sixth day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for one man, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. And he said unto them, This is what the Lord hath said, Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake ye that which ye will bake today, and seethe that which ye will seethe, and that which remaineth overlay up for you to be kept until morning. And they laid it up until morning, and as Moses bade, and it did not stink, neither was there any worm therein. So the Lord had provided for them that on the sixth day they could pick a double portion, which was for the sixth day and for the seventh day for the rest. So he says tomorrow will be the Sabbath. So he goes on to say that 6 days you will gather it, but on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none. And it came to pass that when they went, that there went out some people on the seventh day for to gather, and there was found none. So we see that on the 15th day of the month they complained. At evening, which will be the beginning of the next day. Okay, I'll get to that now. Just accept that is the beginning of the next day. In other words, on the 16th day, when the 16th day started, the quail came, and then 12 hours later, the bread, the manna came. So that would have been, the 16th day would have been the first day, and then they continued collecting for 6 days. So 16th, the first, the 17th day would have been the second working day. The 18th would have been the third working day. The 19th would have been the fourth working day. The 20th would have been the fifth working day, and the 21st would have been the 6th working day. And on the 6th day they collected double, and the next day, the 22nd day of the month, would have been the Sabbath day. So we see on this instance that the Sabbath day occurred on the 22nd day, and therefore the 15th day must have been the Sabbath. So in this story, the 15th day was the Sabbath, 15th day of the month was the Sabbath day, and the 22nd day of the month was the Sabbath day. So this would have been consistent throughout. There is no other day that can be assigned to the Sabbath day in this story other than the 15th and the 22nd. So by deduction, if the 15th was a Sabbath day, that would have meant the 8th day was a Sabbath day, which would have meant that the first day of the month had to be a new moon day. And also by definition, if the 22nd day was the Sabbath day, then the 29th day had to be the following Sabbath day. So the structure of the month is defined in this story as to which days were the Sabbath days. So there is no way that we can move a Sabbath to the 14th day and the 21st and the 28th of the month and still have this scripture to be so if one had to move the Sabbath to the 14th, the 7th, 14th, 21st and 28th, as some believe is the case, then this story doesn't hang together anymore, because it clearly defines the 15th and the 22nd day as the Sabbath days. We can't, that would break scripture, and we cannot break scripture. Scripture cannot be broken. So I think that pretty much deals with the fact that Sabbaths will always fall on these days, the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th days of any month, consistently. Okay, then I'm going to just deal with one last thing, and that is the beginning. The beginning of the year. This is now, if we've got a structure of the month, we know that it's either 29 or 30 days. We know that the first day is New Moon Day. We know that there follows 4 Sabbath cycles, and to get to the following month, which sometimes has an extra New Moon Day and sometimes not. We know that the Sabbaths fall on the 8th, 15th, 22nd and 29th day of the month. So we've got a pretty well defined calendar. The only thing that now remains, and we also know when the 13th month is added, because that's defined by the position of by a particular constellation, and I'm going to get into that now. Okay, so the beginning of the year, and when and also if we know when the beginning of the year is, we'll know when the extra month must be added. The only place that we have for a beginning of the year is in the Exodus story again. In Exodus 12 verse 1, the Lord spoke unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month, or this moon, is to be more correctly translated, this moon shall be unto you the beginning of moons, or this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. So something happened there. The Lord says, this moon, you see this moon here? This is the beginning of your moons. This is the beginning of your month, of your year. This is the first of your moons. This is the beginning of all the moon cycles. This is the beginning of the year. This is the first moon for the year. In other words, the beginning of the year. And that's it. We're not told anything else. We're not told what the circumstances. We know that by that stage the crops had been destroyed. We know that the barley had been destroyed during the 10 plagues, but we don't have any real definition as to what on earth did Moses see when the Lord showed him that moon, so that he would know that this moon was the first of all the moons. Now he's looking up at the moon. there's no crops to be spoken of. Everything's been destroyed. What do you think he was looking at? He was looking at the sun, moon, and stars. So this, I believe that if we are to be true to Genesis 1:14, the beginning of the year, let's just go to Genesis 1:14 again. I'm going to come back to page 15 here now. I just want to ask you a question. Just have a look at this. Genesis 1:14. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. Do you see anything there about any crop? Do you see anything about any about any barley or any agricultural? Nothing. There's nothing there. There's absolutely nothing here that says that barley or any crop determines the days or the years. Nothing. Zero. Zipper. I don't know where people get this from. Where do they all of a sudden decide that barley determines the beginning of the years, when there's no mention of this in Genesis 1:14? We have to go based on what Genesis 1:14 tells us. And 15 to 19 goes on to add to that. We have to find the solution for the beginning of the year in the sun, moon, and stars. And you'll remember I highlighted the signs. What is the signs? The signs is a picture. It's a picture that we have to see along the road. And when we see that picture, we know that the turnoff is here. Or we must stop here. Or we must start here. It's the sign. It's the sign we're looking for. And the sign can only be in the stars. So what is it in the stars that we need to see to know it's the beginning of the year? Well, we know that the Lord called it Abib. There's page 15. We know that the Lord called it Abib. I didn't actually bring that verse in here. Let me see if I can find it quickly. Okay. We see here that in Exodus 23:15, thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread. Thou shalt eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I commanded thee, in the appointed time of the month Abib. For it is for in it thou comest out of Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty. So we know that the feast of unleavened bread is in the first month of the year. And here in this verse, the scriptures call that month, the Lord, Yahweh calls it the month of Abib. So we know that the first month is called Abib. What does that mean? What is Abib? And this is where I started scratching my head. And how do we get Abib in the stars? Where is the link between Abib and the stars? And I believe with everything that's in me that it's all linked to the star speaker. Yeah. So when the Lord told Moses that this is the first month, we're not told what it is. What is the identification criteria that we need to look at for the beginning of this month? But what I'm fairly certain that it's got nothing to do with the ripening of any particular grain or harvest. I believe that Yahweh's calendar is designed to be read from anywhere in the world. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, and you don't have to be connected to the Israeli agricultural fraternity to be able to determine the beginning of the year. It's just ludicrous. It's not in Genesis 14. Genesis 1:14. It's not there. It doesn't make sense. So I believe it's absolutely, completely wrong. And the evidence, the scriptures tell us that it's wrong. That the crops have got nothing to do with the calendar. Yes, if the calendar is read correctly, then the crops ripening will occur exactly when they're supposed to, according to Yahweh's plan. But we're not to use the crops to determine the calendar. So we need to understand what it is that in this Abib, if it's got nothing to do with crops, what is it? What is it? And I believe the answer lies in the naming of the stars. We know that the word Abib means a grain head, or head of grain. So where in the stars can we find something that's related to grain, or the head of grain? And we find that connection to the star Spica, which is Latin for the term head of grain. It has the same meaning. Spica and Abib have the same meaning. And so Spica represents the branch, or the grain that's in the right hand of Virgo, the Virgin. So in the right hand of the Virgin, the star, the constellation that represents the woman, the Virgin, in her hand she has the branch, the grain, the sheaf of grain. And we call it Spica today. But I believe everything within it was originally called Abib. In the Hebrew language, I believe that star was called Abib. And when they saw that star, when they saw the constellation Virgo rising in the east, and they saw that the moon was the start of the new moon, they would know that was the sign of the beginning of the year. So when the Lord said, "This is your first of your moons," he would have recognized Virgo in the heavens, in the east, having just risen, the star sign Spica, originally called Abib, visible, and they would know that is the beginning of the year. So that would be the sign for the beginning of the year. And each month there's a new constellation that rises in the east. And when we start to, I'm not going to do it here in this video, but if you take a program like Stellarium and you start with the first month where Virgo rises in the east, and you go month by month, you will see that the constellations tell a story. Right now, today, which is the 20th day of July, was on the true Sun, Moon and Stars calendar, was the 5th day of the 4th month. The very day the same day that Ezekiel saw the mobile throne of God, that's described in Ezekiel chapter 1, the 5th day of the 4th month. So this is where we're at, and right now, if you have to go and have a look, which constellation is rising in the east, you will find that amongst them is Aquila, the eagle. The eagle is busy rising right now in the 4th month, what I believe to be the true. Of course, the Jews are calling it the 5th month, but I believe it is the 4th month, and I'm going to get into that a little bit now as well. So the celestial sign that we need to be looking for to determine the first month of the year is the constellation Virgo with Spica visible in the east. Spica, Abib, just visible in the eastern horizon when the sun and moon are in constellation, would mark the beginning of the year. And that would be true consistently all the way from Adam through to our time. The same rule would apply. I believe that the Lord is unchanging, that his calendar is unchanging. He never changed. He restored the calendar with Moses. When Moses, at the beginning of Exodus, he restored the calendar, didn't change it. The calendar has always been the same from the beginning. in the sun, moon, and stars, we we just lost sight of how to read it. So, just to recap, we know that it's vitally important to understand the true start of the biblical year. And I'm stressing again, we're talking about the biblical year, not the solar year, not the lunar year. What is the true beginning of the biblical year is when the three things that need to be in place. Sun is in conjunction with the moon, and speaker is rising in the east. That would mark the beginning of the year. And if we get to the end of the 12th month and we don't see speaker in the east, rising in the east, we don't see the Virgo rising in the east, then we must wait another month to the next conjunction of the sun and the moon before we start the year. And there we have now the sun and the moon and the stars controlling and governing when a 13th month is added. It's not a man-made thing. It's all built in the sun, moon, and stars. And we just need to follow the right signs, and then we'll be okay. So the arrival of the first working day of the year, which is the second day of the first month, is announced at the arrival of the crescent moon on the on the western horizon, just after sunset, while speaker is clearly visible above the eastern horizon. And we can apply this throughout the ages. So what I did in this study a few years ago is I did some stills, some pictures from using stellarium for these instances. So this was in the year 2022 when I did it. And when we apply those rules, sun and moon in conjunction, so there's the sun, there's the moon, they just moved past. This is now the first working day. Identified that the moon would just be a crescent now. It's not dark anymore. It's got the first crescent, so the first working day. And there we see speaker on the eastern horizon. I've just removed the horizons. These two pictures, this first picture and this second picture, are both the same date and time. So the third day of April 2022 at that particular time is the same two pictures. Just in this one, I've removed the horizon, so that we can see the position of the sun just below the horizon. So the green line here, the green line is the horizon, so the sun is just below the horizon, sunset, and we would just see the crescent moon, and we would see speaker, and we would then, that would be the beginning of the year. And we see that in 2022 the beginning of the year was early in April. We apply the same rules in the year 33 AD, the year that Jesus was crucified. We see that the beginning of the year was actually on 21st of March. Same rules. Sun and moon in conjunction just after sunset, speaker on the horizon. That would determine the beginning of the year so late March in the year 33 AD. If we go back to 1,500 years, so 1500 BC, we see that applying the same rules, sun and moon in conjunction, speaker on the horizon, and we would see that the beginning of the year in terms of Gregorian dates would have been the 19th of March. I'll go through this again, and we'll see the position of the sun. Maybe I must just highlight the position of the sun. We see here now in this day 2022, we see for the beginning of the year, even though the rules are all there, the sun is in Pisces. But in Jesus' day, we see the sun is just going into Aries, beginning of Aries. Okay? And so let me just, sorry, yeah, that's Tuesday. And then in the year 1500, we see the sun is still in Aries, 1500. It hadn't moved out. So in the time of This would have been the time of the Exodus, Moses' day. This is the picture that he would have seen for the beginning of the year. Speaker on the horizon, conjunction, sun is in Aries, and this would have been the beginning of his year. Then in the year 4000 BC, the time of Adam, we see here, same rules apply. Sun and moon in conjunction. Yeah, we see all of a sudden now the sun is actually in Taurus. But Speaker is on the horizon. If you go a month earlier than this, then Speaker is below the horizon. So same rules apply, but we see that the sun is in a different position. But always the rules are sun and moon in conjunction, Speaker just above the horizon, and that would be the mark of the beginning of the year. And we see here that would be late March in terms of Gregorian dates. That would be the beginning of the year. So those are just three, 4 examples at different. You can use Stellarium to check it out for yourself. Okay. And then this is an example of what I've put together in terms of what the calendars look like. I'll provide a link in the description box to these calendars all the way from the year 2020 up to the year 2036, I think it is. So and it's all based on the rules that I've just described to you, where we've got a month comprising either 30 or 29 days. Where there's an extra day, I call it a transition day. Okay, so in a 30-day month, there's the 29th day of the first month. Then we've got a transition day before we start on the first day of the second month, which is New Moon Day. New Moon Day is the first day of the month. The second day of the month would be the first working day, 6 working days, and then the 7th day after 6 working days, and the 8th day of the month would be the first Sabbath. Then 6 working days, and the 15th day of the month would be the Sabbath, and then 6 working days, and so on. So that's just the layout of the calendars, and I've also marked the position of the appointed times. I think it's fairly straightforward and self-explanatory in terms of the structure of the calendars. This is 3 months, and then the next that goes on for all the other months. So that will be available if you want to go and have a look at the current year 2026, where we're at. We are today on the 5th day of the 4th month, which is the 20th of July. Right, and then the final thing, and then I'm going to be closing this teaching, is just when is a day. So when does a day start from a biblical perspective? We know that in the Gregorian calendar, the day starts in midnight, starts a new day, and then it goes through to midnight. So the start and end of the day is in the darkness. That's telling in itself. That's a mark of the enemy. He wants the beginning in darkness and the end in darkness. But in the Lord's pattern, it starts in darkness and ends in light. If you look at that pattern, you'll see it right throughout. Everything starts in darkness and ends in light. Day is no different. We have the evening, the morning, the first day. We see that in the description of the creation story. Evening, morning, first day, evening, morning, second day, etc., etc. So we see in Genesis 1:5, we see God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening, the morning, the first day. So we see here that the word day defines 2 different things. The word day defines the light portion of the day, but it also defines the whole 24-hour cycle. It's no different to our English language. We talk about a day being a 24-hour period, or we talk about the day being during this when the sun is shining. It's also day. When the sun is not shining, it's night. But we also refer to a 24-hour cycle as being one day. So no difference in Hebrew. This H31:17 can mean the light portion of the day, or it can mean the whole 24-hour period. No different. Okay. So a day, a 24-hour period, is structured as evening, night, morning, day. Okay, those are the 4 parts of it. So the darkness part of it is the evening and night portion of it, and the light portion of it is the morning and day portion of it. So just in terms of, so in a day, a whole 24-hour day, you've got a dark portion, you've got a light portion. The dark portion comprises of evening and night, okay? But the whole thing can be called night, okay? And in the light portion, you've got morning and day, but the whole portion here is called day. So that block there really just depicts the structure of a day. So in a biblical day, it runs from sunset to sunset. Okay, just the order of darkness and light is consistent throughout the Lord's creation. I didn't highlight this, but I do think it's worthwhile just so if you say, in the beginning, God created the heaven and earth, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the sea. We have darkness. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. So we see darkness, then light. This, of course, is not the light of the sun and the moon. This is the light. Jesus was the light. Let there be light. This is the light of life. So first was darkness, then light. It's very consistent in the system. Okay. So this is my last thought. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about where we're at and what's potentially coming up. We've got this strange situation where we've got a year being 365 and a quarter days, and the moon being 354.36 days, and we've got some months having 29 days, and some months having 30 days, and some years having 12 months, and some years having 13 months. So it seems a little bit of a chaotic situation, and it's imperfect. And I sit and pondered on this. Why did the Lord not just make it a simple 7-day cycle, 28 days in the month, or even just a fixed 29 days in the month, one new moon day, 364 days in a year, completely divisible by 7, not have to worry about 13th month, 12 months in the year. We know, some calendars that try to achieve that, nice, perfect 364 days, 12 complete months, nice round numbers. Okay, those are obviously not what the Lord had in mind. He created a calendar with all these strange portions of a day in what appear to be inconsistent cycles and chaotic situation. And I thought, well, what is the reason for all of this? And I believe it's this, that Yahweh's calendar is perfect. In our eyes, it may not be perfect, but what's imperfect in our eyes is perfect in His eyes. And we are required to look up and follow Him. We are required to look up and follow His calendar. We must look up. We need to follow Him. We need to look to Him to see when we need to add the extra day in the month. We need to look to Him to understand when we need to add the extra month in a year. We need to look to Him to know when the year starts and when the year ends. We need to look up and follow Him. Don't try and create your own calendar. This is a sign of obedience. When we look up and follow Him, we are being obedient to His will. And that's what I believe the calendar is all about. Determining who's going to follow Him and who's going to do their own thing. As for me, I'm going to do I'm going to try and follow Him to the best of my ability. And I believe this is a truth that we can add to our collection of truths. And now in closing, I just want to deal with where we are at and where we're going. We know that on the Jews' calendar, the 9th of the 5th month is coming up in just 3 days' time. And probably by the time you watch this video, maybe it's even a day or two, or even after this particular day. I believe that we'll go through this day, and it will not be the day that the bride is taken. And that's a pretty bold statement, because we understand that the 9th of the 5th month is a critical day. It is an important day in the Jews' calendar. It's the day of Pentecost. It's the day that the Holy Spirit came down on the church. I believe it is the very day that Jesus was baptized. We know that the that the events will take place over a 6-week period from the 9th of the 5th month through to the beginning of the 7th month. We're fairly clear on that in terms of scripture. We look back and understand what happened the first time round when the temple was destroyed in the first time round, and we can follow a certain pattern of things. So when we do that, when you go and read the story in 1 Kings 25 and in Jeremiah, I think it's 39, we see that in the 9th year I'm not going to go to those scriptures. I'm just going to just talk to it. We see that in the 9th year, I think it was of Zedekiah, we see that there was a besiege, and 2 years later, on the 9th day of the 4th month, Zedekiah and the men of fighting, I believe that's the military leaders, tried to escape out of Jerusalem. At that point, Jerusalem was besieged. There was no bread in the city. There was no. They were under a siege, and Zedekiah and his military generals and military commanders tried to escape out of Jerusalem, and they were captured in the plain. And the military men were killed, and Zedekiah and his sons were taken into captivity. His sons were killed before him, and Zedekiah's eyes were put out, and he was taken as captive to Babylon. And that occurred starting on the 9th day of the 4th month. Within a month of that, the temple was destroyed. So on the 9th day of the 5th month is the day that the king's house was burnt down, the temple was burnt down, and the actual destruction of a good portion of Jerusalem occurred on the 9th day of the 5th month, which is a day that many bad things have happened. Besides the destruction of both the first and the second temple occurring on that day, we know that that was the day of the bad report from the 12 the spies that were sent out to spy out the land, and they came back with a bad report on the 9th day of the 5th month. We know that it was the day that they worshipped the golden calf. It was the day that many bad things happened, and I don't think it will be any different this year. So for that reason, some people are looking at the 9th of the 5th month now, according to the Hebrew calendar, but I do believe that we will have to wait another 4 weeks for the true 9th day of the 5th month. However, something pretty bad can happen on the 9th day of the 4th month, which did happen originally with regards to the leadership so Israel lost their leadership on the 9th day of the 4th month. They lost their temple and a good portion of Jerusalem on the 9th day of the 5th month. By the 1st day of the 7th month, after Gedaliah had been put in place to govern for about 6 weeks, Gedaliah was killed, and that was the end of they were exiled, basically. The remnant that was still remained by the time that Gedaliah was killed in the 7th month, the remnant of them that were still in the land, exiled to Egypt. And from that point in time, they were in exile, between some in Egypt and some in Babylon, for a period of 70 years. So we're looking to a repeat of that in these end times. It's just interesting to note that as of today, 2 years ago, is when Iran sent that barrage of 300 odd different missiles and rockets, and that onslaught that happened about 2 years ago, equivalent to the original beginning of the siege in the original story in 1 Kings 25. We see now that we are at the 9th day of the 4th month. We'll be watching what happens, and we'll see if we get confirmation. Whether it's the true 9th day of the 5th month or the true 9th day of the 4th month, we will soon find out. And then, if it turns out to be the 9th day of the 4th month, then we've got another 4 weeks or so to get to the 9th day of the 5th month. And I do believe that that is the day that we're looking for in this year. So I'm going to just say this. I know that this video will only be watched to this point by a handful of people, quite honestly. Most would have bailed really early in the video, and the few that continued might have probably bailed halfway through the video, and by this point they're literally just a handful watching. So I'm going to leave it in God's hands. I'm going to leave it in the Holy Spirit's hands. Those that need to see it will see it. Those that need to help and guide those that will need maybe a guidance as to what the reason for nothing happening in 2-3 days time. We've come through it probably hundreds of times. We've been disappointed, so this will just be another day, another time when we've come to a date that we expected something to happen, and what we expected to happen didn't happen, and we will then obviously be looking to try and find an answer to the reason for that, and if that turns out to be the case, I believe the answer is and will be that we are just 1 month too early in terms of God's calendar. I do believe something really bad must happen on the 9th of the 5th month on the Jews' calendar, so that they can recognize it. I think the bad thing will be that their government, I can't say exactly what will happen, but something to do with their government and their military leaders, and that will be a very, very clear confirmation of the understanding. If I'm wrong in terms of this calendar, and if the Jews are right that we are in fact in the 5th month, then then obviously there is a possibility, if that is correct, that the bride will be taken. But I suspect strongly that we will be here to witness another month. Anyway, I don't want this to come across as I'm trying to prove anybody wrong. I'm just trying to understand God's calendar, understand the biblical calendar, understand His timing, and I'm really just trying to get to the bottom, the truth of the matter. And I'm waiting, just like everybody else, for confirmation. Just like Moses needed confirmation as to when the true beginning of the year was, these events, I believe, will confirm the understanding of when the true beginning of the year is and where the true 9th day of the 5th month is. And once that is confirmed, then we'll be able to go forward. And if that, at least we will see that if we look at Psalm 90, we see it speaks of the 70 and with strength 80, and then we fly away. And immediately after that, it speaks of the wrath of God, and then it speaks of the show us how to number our days. So at least by the millennial reign, after the wrath, we will understand how to number our days. But I believe for those that have been seeking and trying to understand the calendars and watching for His coming, I believe that we will understand the true calendar earlier, at the beginning of this next Exodus story. Anyway, with that, I hope this video is a blessing to you. Please have a look. I will provide the links to both the original document and this marked up version of the study, so that you can go and follow the video in your with the document fully in front of you, the marked up version of it, and the original version that's not marked up. There is more detail that's provided in the document that that might add more clarity. There are other videos explaining some of the detail on the calendar before. So with that, may the Lord bless you and keep you until we meet. Good night and goodbye.